Here's the paradox that kills drivers. Brakes perform best when they're screaming hot, yet push them just 5 degrees too far and they simply stop working. A Formula One car can decelerate from 200 miles per hour to 50 in less than 3 seconds, but only if the brake fluid sits in a razor-thin thermal window. Miss that window by a handful of laps and what was a controlled corner becomes a wall at full speed. Today we're diving into how teams walk that impossible line between ice-cold brakes that won't bite and fade, that erases stopping power entirely. In 2016, at Monaco, we watched a championship contender lock up at the Fairmont hairpin. Not because he panicked, but because his brake fluid had climbed to 380 degrees Celsius over 14 consecutive laps of hard braking, and the pad friction coefficient had collapsed. That single moment cost him pole position and eventually the season, because brake management isn't just about going fast. It's about sustaining that speed through a full race distance without crossing the threshold where physics abandons you. Teams that master thermal cycling win championships. They read every telemetry trace, every pad temperature sensor, every cooling duct adjustment. The teams that don't, they're fighting the car from lap 2 onwards, scratching their heads at a problem they can't solve because they're not thinking in thermal windows. They're thinking in seconds and hundredths. This isn't theory. This is why some drivers hit their marks on lap 35 while others are already backing off, hunting for stability that vanished when the brakes gave up. So what's actually happening inside that brake system as temperatures climb and lap times blur together? When a brake pad is cold, say at 40 degrees Celsius at the start of a race, the friction material is dense and hard, almost like rubber on ice. It grips, but not with the bite a driver needs to haul a 900-kilogram car from 300 to 80 kilometers per hour in under 3 seconds. Heat changes that equation completely. As you brake into turn 1, friction converts kinetic energy into thermal energy, and the pad temperature rises toward 50, then 200 degrees. That's the golden zone where the resin binder in the friction compound becomes plastic-like, tacky, almost alive. Grip multiplies. The driver feels it immediately. A firm pedal, predictable stopping. The car does what he asks. But here's where the paradox bites. Push beyond 300 degrees and something sinister happens inside the brake fluid itself. Modern racing fluids boil at around 260 to 280 degrees, designed to stay liquid under extreme stress. But when the caliper temperature keeps climbing, vapor bubbles form inside the brake lines. Hydraulic fluid can't compress, vapor can, so the pedal becomes soft, spongy, almost hollow. The driver pushes the same pressure, but the brakes have become a spring, not a clamp. Meanwhile, the pad friction coefficient, the measure of how much grip the material provides, drops like a stone past 350 degrees. The resin glues start to break down, releasing gases that form a microscopic layer between pad and rotor, like trying to stop a car with a cushion of air between your foot and the floor. Lap after lap, heat builds. A braking point that worked perfectly on lap 3 becomes a gamble by lap 12 because the thermal window, that narrow band where brakes perform, has shifted higher, hotter, closer to the edge of catastrophe. And if a driver arrives at the hairpin already at 370 degrees with no margin left, one hard application pushes into that red zone where hydraulics fail and pad grip evaporates. And suddenly there's no stopping. Only physics saying no. Consider the 2016 German Grand Prix at Hockenheim, where Lewis Hamilton's Mercedes began to suffer unexplained lockups in the final stint. Not because his brakes were cold, but because they'd climbed into the fade zone. The team had miscalculated thermal load on a circuit where long straights and late braking demand generated extreme heat, and by lap 40, his pad friction coefficient had plummeted so far that even perfect technique couldn't compensate. Rosberg, in the sister car running a slightly different cooling strategy, managed the thermal window better, and that single variable, brake temperature management, cost Hamilton places and points when the championship was tight. Fast forward to 2019, Charles Leclerc's Ferrari at Monaco, where the opposite problem struck. His brakes stayed too cold through the opening lap because the slow circuit didn't generate enough heat to bring the pads into their optimal working range. Cold brakes mean minimal friction, minimal stopping power, and on Monaco's narrow streets with walls instead of runoff, he ran wide at the portiere, touched the barrier, and the crash cost Ferrari a strong starting position. The cruel truth that drivers need to thread the needle, arrive at each corner hot enough for grip, but not so hot that hydraulic pressure collapses and friction disappears. A window often no wider than 50 degrees Celsius, and on a lap that spans 2.5 minutes with 6 or 7 hard braking zones, that thermal budget shrinks with every application. So here's the thought experiment. Imagine you're a driver with perfect technique, perfect inputs, perfect racecraft, but you cannot control the ambient temperature or the track surface on race day. Now imagine your brakes have a thermal sweet spot of, say, 180 to 230 degrees Celsius. Just 50 degrees of margin. Miss it by 10 degrees either direction and your stopping power evaporates. Cold and you're locked and sliding. Hot and the fluid boils and the pedal goes soft. That's not a mistake you can recover from. That's physics writing the outcome before the corner even arrives. So here's what you take away. Brakes must live in a razor-thin thermal window, usually 50 degrees or less, to deliver stopping power lap after lap. Second, that window shrinks with every corner. Teams must actively cool or the cumulative heat betrays them, often fatally. And third, this isn't a problem you can outdriver. It's physics, and physics wins every time. Tell us in the comments, do you want us to dig deeper into cooling duct design next? Or should we explore how different pad compounds shift that sweet spot entirely? And please subscribe, because motorsport's real secrets live in the details nobody else bothers to explain.